Hi all. Before we dive into today's episode, I want to tell you about something that's shaping up to be one of the highlights of the year for independent optometry. It's the OptiPro Roadshow 2025. And if you're an avid listener of the podcast, I'm sure you're very passionate about the future of eye care. If that's the case, the Roadshow is something you want to be a part of. This event series will take place in Sydney on the 26th of September, Brisbane on the 10th of October, and Perth on the 17th of October. Expect supplier showcases, keynote presentations, networking, and tailored content that speaks directly to the challenge and opportunities in independent practices today. Spots are filling fast, so register at optipro.com.au.
Welcome to The Focused View, the podcast for eye care professionals across Australia. Brought to you by Opticare. In each episode, we bring together leading eye care, optical, and business professionals to share valuable insights, practical tips, and the latest trends shaping the optical business landscape. I'm your host, Michael Nasser, and together we'll explore innovative strategies for practice growth, patient care, and business success in the eye care industry. Whether you're starting your career, managing a practice, or just looking to stay ahead of the field, The Focused View is your source for inspiration and knowledge.
In today's episode, I'm excited to be joined by Erich Matte. Erich is the founder of Akrinos, a US-based business dedicated to helping eye care practices thrive across all stages of ownership. While we initially set out to explore the practice lifecycle, from startup to scaling to succession, this conversation took a fascinating turn. What unfolded was a dynamic and wide-ranging discussion comparing the optometry landscape in the United States and Australia. We touch on the impact of private equity, evolving scope of practice, the adoption of telehealth, niche service opportunities, and how changing consumer behaviours like the rise of walk-in prescriptions are shaping the way independent practices operate. Throughout the episode, there's a strong theme of information sharing, learning from what's working in other markets to help strengthen and future-proof independent practices here at home. We'll be catching up with Erich again soon to dive into the original topic of practice lifecycle in more detail. But for now, enjoy this first conversation. It's packed with insights and a great reminder on how much we can learn from each other across borders. Let's get into it. Erich, thanks for joining us today.
Michael, it's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, I'm really excited about today's episode. Your experience, for those obviously that will come to know, you're US based and over here over in Australia, we generally look to the US for a lot of things, especially when it comes to that business side of the industry. So I guess before we get into it, can you give me your story? Let me know a little bit about you. Let the audience learn who Erich is and what Erich's about.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Michael. And again, man, thank you so much for inviting me to come on the show. You know, we've connected digitally, seeing as I'm US based in New Orleans, Louisiana. But the beauties of technology that folks like us can connect and hit it off and have some really great engaging conversations. So Michael, for me, the journey here in vision eye care started in 2010. So I came into the industry working in the vision care division of a global leader in eye care, carrying a bag, you know, repping contact lenses down here in the Gulf South. You know, it's through that experience in getting to understand the business of vision and eye care across the scope of clinical and retail settings that really kind of started to lay the groundwork for what is now Akrinos, right? So as a vendor rep in industry, you get the opportunity to interact with doctors at all phases of their career and with all sorts of ambitions. And again, it was kind of a journey of seeing the challenges that doctors were facing, whether it was as an emerging practice owner looking to cold start or purchase their very first business, or fast forward a few years to those doctors that were really in the peak earnings and growth years of their practices and seeing the challenges they faced in taking their business to the next level, right? And then certainly that third phase of the business life cycle and the transition, seeing doctors that had built these legacy businesses and the challenges they faced in navigating their exit. So I suppose you'd say perhaps the most intimate market research you could do, right? As far as boots on the ground, really observing this firsthand. And so for me, that's where this vision for Akrinos all started. So through that journey, you know, I had the opportunity to go back to graduate school, do my MBA here at my on my undergrad alma mater, Loyola University, New Orleans, go Wolfpack, and launched Akrinos in the summer of 21. It's fascinating when you kind of start to put those pieces together, because particularly in my graduate studies, business is changing at a rapid rate. Healthcare is changing at a rapid rate. It's not a matter of finding better ways to do things the way they were done 30 years ago. Now's the time of totally reinventing the way that things are done, right? So really a focus on entrepreneurship and innovation. So ever since I launched Akrinos in the summer of 21, we've really been on this mission to empower doctors, to make the business of eye care more approachable, accessible, and profitable to doctors that are starting, growing, and transitioning in independent practice. And it's been a mighty exciting journey, impacting a lot of lives along the way.
I can imagine. I really like how you break down the optometry life cycle in some capacity from a business point of view, from the startup to the growth stage, and then obviously the transition stage at the end. And I think if you break it up in that particular category, you can speak to the challenges of each. And I definitely hope that we get to that, and we definitely will. But if we come back a little bit, so you obviously you were working in the industry, you got into it. Obviously, I don't know whether it was by luck or it was just a fate sort of thing that occurred. And you spoke about the pieces that you put together. What was it about what you learned in those early years, say prior to 2010, when you decided to start Akrinos with regards to the consulting business? What was it that you saw that the industry lacked or needed, or what was that opportunity that presented to you, and how did that lead you to start Akrinos? And what is Akrinos, and can you talk more about the business specifically, and I guess how you are tackling those challenges that you identified in those early years?
Yeah, absolutely. And, Michael, it was getting the opportunity to connect with doctors that were practicing across the spectrum of clinical and retail settings, right? So observing what was taking place in private practice and independent practice, but also in corporate retail settings, in the private equity settings, which private equity has made a big growth push here in the last 12 years here in the States, right?
Yeah.
Even in hospital settings, right? So again, Michael, it was going into all these different settings and observing the way doctors wanted to build their practices, observing the way doctors wanted to care and interact with their patients and with their teams. And that's where I started to become fascinated at some of the differences, right? And those differences, perhaps how they most emphatically play out from a business standpoint is, at the end of the day, hey, profitable business with happy people.
Yeah.
Struggling business with a lot of less happy people. So to see how there have come to be gaps in how doctors can proactively run their business. And I know you and I have had conversations off air about that, right? How we can serve independence and empower independence to grow and thrive as an independent business, but really, when you break it down and you look at it across those three phases of the business life cycle, for the doctor starting their very first business, whether they're going to cold start it or purchase it, think of all the, what do I do through each phase? The planning phase, all of the analysis, financial, legal, operational. I mean, the list goes on, right? Whether it's the development phase, where it's time to really pull all these elements together to make this business happen, or the launch phase, right? The implementation, making it happen. But truly looking at that for doctors that were in those early phases, wanting to start their very first business, buy their very first business, fast forward to doctors that are in ownership, say perhaps 10 years in, where you've paid off the startup loan or getting close to paying off the startup loan. If you're in a leased space, your lease would be expiring, but also this coincides within these businesses could really start to throw off some cash flow, some profit, right? And just seeing all the different ways that doctors can grow there, right? I mean, where I've always been fascinated the fact that practices kind of all hit the same plateau. And like here in the US, everybody celebrates these milestones, like the $1 million milestone. Oh, it's $1 million practice. Okay, that's great. What are your expenses? I mean, if you're $1 million business, but your expenses are 1.1 mil, you're not going to last for too very long. You know what I mean? So it's really about helping doctors gain control of their business below the surface, where it really impacts. Sure, you can talk about this fun top level stuff at the trade show or at the cocktail party, but at the end of the day, is this business living up to the expectations that an owner has, because people pour their souls into their businesses.
Yeah.
And I believe it's very much, the work we do within Akrinos is to empower them in the business for these things to be powerful, profitable, efficient operations. And I tell you, it's fascinating. Practices at any phase, looking at how doctors can take their business to the next level with having the tools, with having the insights. It's much like patient care. You figure it starts with the diagnostics. It starts with evaluating, right? And if you're using the wrong evaluation methods, then you're not going to hit the mark. So using the right methods, the right tools to evaluate the right analytics to piece together a strategic plan that's in their best interest, and then empower them to do that. So applying that to the different phases of the business life cycle, again, early stage, growth stage, and that transition stage, because that is huge. I mean, here in the US, we have many, many doctors that are in ownership that are looking for partners. They are looking for that legacy. And certainly private equity has capitalized on that to a degree.
Yeah.
And we'll perhaps unpack that a bit more in this conversation as well.
I think so, yeah. Obviously, in America, doctors are referred to as optometrists. In Australia, we generally don't refer to, although the later grads are doctors, we refer to them as optometrists. So just in case anyone's getting caught up on that, I think that's an important sort of distinction to make, as well as I tend to find opticians is another common word that's used in the US, and we say dispenser in Australia. So a few little things there. But other than that, you mentioned a couple of things. One of them in particular, I guess, speaks to the close look at the Australian market and maybe the look that you've had now. I don't know, we've discussed about this initially with regards to what the Australian market looks like, but what the similarities and differences are that stood out, say, in comparison to the US market. And I guess I asked that question for relativity. From what I see, there is a very close similarity between the markets. You've mentioned, independents, corporates, private equity. I mean, these are all terms that we utilize here, obviously at a much smaller scale, the breakup between corporate and independent. But I guess, from a starting point, what have you observed as the differences? And I might sort of, help with regards to the Australian side of things. But from the things that you've seen, what are the similarities with the Australian market and the US market, with regards to the industry as a whole and plays within it, when we're talking about that business side?
Yeah. I think the best way to serve this up is to look at the basics. I try to always bring things back to basics. I studied economics in my undergrad, so I always tie it back to supply and demand, right? And at the end of the day, when we look globally, so similarities between US and Australia, the fact is the public health need for vision, medical, and specialty eye care continues to grow. And there is no end in sight. And what's driving that is lifestyle choices, more screen time, more behaviors, right? Environmental factors, so more time indoors and what that does to the eye health and vision, right? And longevity, right? So in the context of that, we see over 3/4 of the population using some form of vision correction, right? So there's a huge ever-growing demand for the services that doctors of optometry here in the US, optometrists in Australia, there's a huge and growing public health need for that, whether it's primary vision care, which is something that optometrists in both markets serve. When we start getting into medical care and even minor surgical care, which is something that has surged here in the US, the expansion of scope of care, it truly, this all ties back to serving the public health need. And that's where I think there's an opportunity for doctors who want to practice on their own in an independent setting. That's where there's an opportunity to grow a business and serve a community in a way that very few others can. And I say that because if as a practitioner, you have your vision of the scope of care you're looking to provide, and knowing that a large majority of the patients coming into the office, US and in Australia, vast majority of those patients reside within a very small geographic radius of where that door is. Here in the US, there is data that shows 90% of patients reside within a 3-mile radius.
Yeah.
In metro and suburban markets. And obviously, you go into some rural markets, it's going to be far bigger than
different.
that.
Yeah.
Similar to you all in different parts of Australia. So if we start to wrap our head around that, Michael, and think through that kind of this hyper localized approach, then it's a matter of, okay, one of two things. One, as a provider, as an optometrist, I want to offer this scope of care, these services and these products. If you're committed to that, then I'm going to say, find the location that most wants those goods and services. Conversely, if you're geographically committed, say you have a family and you've put down roots in this area so that you're not relocating, but you want to go into private practice, understand that market. Look around you. Understand what are the wants and needs of that market. A good example I like to make, a simple example is, hey, if you want to, and I use this example all the time here in the US, right, working with doctors of optometry who are clients of Akrinos, I like to use this example of, are you more medically inclined, wanting to get into more medical care, perhaps with more of an aging geriatric population? Or do you want to do more primary care families where it would be households with children? So based off of that, and by the way, we could get into far more granularity between these two groups. But the point I'm trying to illustrate, Michael, is that if you aspire to providing a high degree of medical care serving a diseased or geriatric population, don't go locate your practice in the suburbs where a bunch of 40-somethings and their families live.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Flip side of the coin, if you want to work with the 40-somethings and the families and the households, don't go locate your practice in a retirement community. So I share that because, and to tie this back to this question, right? The similarities, the differences, the opportunities, the fact is, no matter the scope of care, because that is a big difference between these two markets. But I'm going to say, no matter the scope of care, the public health need for what optometrists can provide, be it doctors of optometry here in the US practicing full scope, or be it optometrists in Australia, there's a huge need for the services and products that you all work with. And I'm going to say that when you're looking at the right analytics, you can plug in a thriving business anywhere if you're doing it the right way, looking at the right stuff, right?
Absolutely. And I like that connection to what is similar. And I guess from a practice point of view and the things that we're mentioning, it definitely relates here and it will help us set that foundation as we sort of, move on to the discussion with regards to, looking at these three different areas and discussing how a practice can, build a practice with purpose. And the one thing that I'm taking is the strategy and the strategic part of this component, which may or may not be neglected, but for the most part, and if people are foraying into one of these areas or find themselves in one of these areas, at least give them some tips to sort of say, okay, you're in this spot. How can you improve the business? How can you become a little bit better? And I think from that point of view, that's definitely a synergy. And I even see further synergy. And I guess I know over here in Australia, we are generally relatively curious about what's happening in the US because, you mentioned scope of care, for example, and practices has really started to grow and take a movement, and that's something that is starting to be discussed here. Now, again, not knowing how far down the track the US is and not sure if you're able to expand on that. But, we do see that generally you guys are ahead of us from that point of view. But from a foundational point of view too, when it comes to the breakup of, say, independent versus corporate, the emerging trend of private equity, can you speak to that really briefly? Because I still feel there's a synergy there with regards to, the players that are in the market. And this is more of maybe a competitor analysis with regards to who's who in the zoo. We're focusing specifically on independents. Generally that's who we interact with. And I'm assuming that's the same for yourself, but obviously
yes.
You could be dealing with corporates. Is that right? Yeah.
Yeah. So to speak on this topic, Michael, it is really fascinating, private equity surging into the vision and eye care space. And, for starters, understand the reason why there's been this proliferation of private equity in our space is because there's a lot of opportunity in this space. So that's kind of like the first point that I think should be aired.
It's a smart business decision.
Exactly. Private equity, this is a business decision. So for anyone kind of enterprising, like follow the money. Where's private equity going? Follow that.
Yeah.
I'm going to argue though, and this is really fascinating, man. So, private equity started making a surge here in the US. It was in, I believe it was in 2012, 2013 was when it was kind of getting started. And in the context of this proliferation of private equity and a further corporatization of healthcare here in the US, now there's some really great research that's coming out of some healthcare economics think tanks. There's one out at UC Berkeley. There's one up at the University of Chicago. Stanford has a team. And they're reporting on and doing research on care models and how different care models serve stakeholders. So consider this, as we've seen the surge of private equity and corporatization come into healthcare, we have seen provider burnout rate continuing to go through the roof, right? The cost of care continues to climb, and the overall quality of care is on the skids here in the US, right? Now, when you look at private practice as a segment of this broader healthcare ecosystem, in private practice, providers experience less burnout, the cost of care is lower, and the overall quality of care and patient experience is higher. In fact, there are some surveys that show patients prefer going to an independent over a hospital corporate private equity at a rate of 4-1.
Wow.
So it's truly fascinating. Now, look, y'all, this isn't to throw spears at anyone.
No.
This is facts.
It's research.
It's research. Absolutely. There are things that hospital systems can do that the independent, that a private practice can't do. Okay. But I think now we're starting to see here in the US, based on research from these amazing think tanks, right? I think we're starting to see some of the fallout here. And, Michael, that very much, I tell everyone, that's the fire in my belly. When people are like, Erich, what makes you continue to do this? And also, Erich, what makes you continue to have Akrinos really focus on optometry and not go into all of healthcare, this or that? It's like, look, there's so much opportunity in this vision eye care space. And the fact is this, I just touched on the benefits of private practice. It empowers our doctors to experience less burnout. The cost of care is lower. And as patients and consumers, we prefer them the vast majority of the time. Okay. But let's take it a step further. Free enterprise is truly what empowers communities. I mean, it's Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations, free enterprise, the invisible hand. And it's fascinating to see the impact of locally owned businesses in communities. Because the fact of the matter is this, when big industry comes to town, it can be a good thing. It can create jobs, okay? But where is the wealth going? The wealth is going out of town. The wealth is going to shareholders all over the globe or whatever. But when you have a private business that's been established in a community, now that wealth is staying in that community. When that doctor, and look, the level of professional fulfillment that we get in what we do, Michael, to take of like, just thinking of any project right now, had a conversation with a client earlier today, starting in Fort Worth, Texas, and we're working with them, right? The stuff that really gives me the tingles is the thought that in 6 months, 9 months time, his doors are going to be open. And that's going to be the beginning of taking care of how many thousands of patients? How many children are going to be able to get the full benefits of their education because of what this practice is going to be able to provide? How many families are going to be able to preserve vision and health of the eye as they age? How many people is he going to employ in his business? How is he employing these people, going to empower these people to raise a family and a household? It's this huge ripple effect of the benefits to so many stakeholders in private practice that in corporate, in private equity, and sure, we probably all, Michael, we may own stock in some of these private equity companies that we compete with just in our mutual fund portfolios and stuff, right? But understand that, that's where the disconnect is. And that's where there's a huge opportunity in private practice for doctors to serve patients the way I believe we're seeing. I say we're about to see. We are seeing patients want to go to independence.
And I agree with that. And from what I've seen in my observations, say with the Australian market, is the private equity has really encroached on, and we'll probably speak on this in the transition phase of the conversation. But just if I touch on it now, because I think it's relatable to the private equity and the growth of private equity and perhaps the flaws that it may present. Invariably, what I've seen is the private equity are taking, they're not starting greenfields, they're taking over established, well-known independent practices. They're generally paying much more than they're probably worth. And so for the old independent owner or for the retiring independent owner, it's a proposition that's almost too good to refuse. But invariably, that practice is rooted into the community, as you've mentioned. And within that comes the locality and the power of local. But when they take over, it's almost like an essence of that is lost. And as much as they try and disguise the fact that they are an independent practice, the reality is that they're not. And all the mechanisms behind that business is completely corporate. And in turn, you lose that identity. And much of the benefits that you speak of, that is obviously coupled with the research findings, as well as, that general benefit you get as being an independent owner and being part of a community and contributing to the community and giving back to the community. And I think that's the synergy that needs to be identified. And I guess therein lies the opportunity. And that's what you see. And I'm the same. I do see it in the same way. If we're looking at other aspects and other areas of interest, I tend to find, so obviously the ownership models that are coming about are really interesting. But we've touched on expanding scope in the US. Is there anything that you're seeing from your point of view that's really changing or differing in the last couple of years compared to, say, when you first started?
Yeah, absolutely, Michael. And, this is a really fascinating topic for a number of reasons. And I suppose for starters, you remember I shared with you, I came into the industry in 2010.
Yeah.
Working with a global leader in eye care and contact lens sales down here in this region. And so I'm a New Orleans native. The Optometry Association of Louisiana is the native state association, right? So I was fortunate enough when working in industry to be working with a company that was a huge supporter of the American Optometric Association. So through that, I just from the very beginning of coming into this industry, very much respected and honored and wanted to serve the greater good that the AOA provides, right? So it was in 2014 that Louisiana became just the third state in the US at the time to advance scope of care to include lasers and lumps and bumps. Okay. And at the time I was in industry, so I was a rep. So it was, I was kind of observing this stuff on the periphery, still not fully understanding the full magnitude of what was being done. But then I started to witness it in the offices of these practices that I would serve, but then also as a resident of Louisiana and a consumer of healthcare in Louisiana and someone who has aging family members in Louisiana, right? So seeing firsthand the impact of expanding scope of care for doctors of optometry here in the state of Louisiana and the impact it had on our state.
Yeah.
Here in the US, optometry is the sole provider of vision and eye care in nearly like 40% of counties across the US. Wow. Optometry is the sole providers. So again, it ties back to the fact that there's this growing public health need.
Yeah.
And we need to meet that need. So if you ask me, everyone needs to level up. Okay. So optometry, level up. Let's serve a broader scope of medical care, full eye care, right? We have our peers in ophthalmology to take care of surgeries. And then we have our peers in opticianry to take care of the fine tuning of spectacles and fit of eyewear and performance of eyewear. So I see optometry as being that link between the greater population and vision and eye care is in optometry. But not only that, Michael, let's take it a step further. Actually, really fascinating getting the opportunity to work on a cold start with someone in the Washington, D.C. area. And I don't know if you're familiar with the realm of oculomics.
I can't say that I am.
So it's now there are increasingly more and more systemic conditions, diseases, the likes of which there are biomarkers that can be seen in the retina, right? The back of the eye is the only place to be able to see blood vessels without like having to cut something open. So when you look at all of these conditions that are being captured, I would invite listeners there in Australia. I would invite you to all to explore some of the explore the latest medical. I know this conversation is more about the business of independent eye care, but go look at some of the latest medical stuff in some of the U.S. journals, and you'll see it's really fascinating how many things now can be caught very early stage through a comprehensive eye exam and an evaluation of the retina. So all of this to say, optometry, I see as being the link between patients, residents, the community, and total vision and eye care. It's coming through optometrists, right? But beyond that, I even see a future where perhaps a primary care visit is with an optometrist, right? Because you can see so many things in the back of the eye. It's absolutely fascinating. It would boggle your mind how many things could be caught first here before an internist would find it through the routine physical exam that the internist would do, right? You can see things in the back of the eye that you can't pick up in a heartbeat or simply listening to someone breathe. It's big. So it's in the context of all of that going back to this initial question you posed about scope of care. So, being a resident of Louisiana, working with an amazing company that exposed me to the American Optometric Association, supported me in my territory to get involved with the state association. And then I see, wow, now they can be zapping these YAG lasers. They can do SLTs for glaucoma. They can do some lid stuff, some lumps and bumps around the lids. It's truly amazing. And to take it a step further, to see ophthalmologists here in the state really lean into this. I think it's another cool thing we're going to see here in the future. I believe our generation of doctors, physicians, optometrists, doctors of optometry, I believe they're going to come together in a way that the retiring generation at times bumped heads.
Yeah, I agree with
it's
that.
going to serve everyone. It's going to serve patients in the greater good, but it's also going to serve businesses, right? Because now we get back to talking Adam Smith, Wealth of Nations. What are you good at? If you can laser focus on what you're really good at and let other people laser focus on what they're really good at, that's where everyone wins, not where we're starting to get into fisticuffs over the overlap areas. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. It's definitely a movement that's gaining more and more traction. And when you speak to those relevant industry associations, they generally have an area that they're focusing on with regards to this increased scope of care. And I think in Australia in particular, a lot of it's related to the fact that there are a lot more optometry students that are graduating as well. So in the last 10 or 15 years, there's been an extra 1 or 2 optometry schools across the country. And we're a small population from that point of view. And with that influx of optometrists, it means that we can focus on that healthcare side, whether it's through hospitals or, through private practice as well.
Here in the U.S., we too are seeing, and it's very exciting to see, we are seeing more graduates and more retention in optometry. So each year we're graduating around 1,600 optometrists.
Wow.
We're retiring 1,200. So we're netting surplus of optometrists. You look at ophthalmology, and they're barely adding to headcount. Like if you look at the graduate versus retirement rate, they're adding less than 100 new providers per year.
That's really interesting
in
stat.
the ophthalmology space. So I would invite in Australia, and I don't know if you have access to that data, perhaps we could explore that in another episode, but
For sure.
I believe these are the types of things to be brought to the forefront to your legislators, and the importance of, exploring this bigger, potentially looming public health gap that you all may be set up for.
Yeah. And the discussions I've had with relevant, industry bodies, I think they've picked up on that, and there is that underworking because of that. And I think the more that, we can support that, I feel as an industry overall, I think the more the community needs that. And it speaks to those elements that you sort of have been touching on from the outset, which is that healthcare need that the community needs, and that's ever growing. The last thing I wanted to ask you about from a general point of view, before we start getting into that nitty gritty of, the business ownership. And again, this is mainly for the part of, I think, most Aussies that will always sort of say, what's happening in the States and with this topic and where are they with that? But, so that's why I'm asking and spending a bit of time on this. I know it's probably not in the context of business specifically, but it's a relatable industry, I guess, insight or insights that, help us shape some opinion. I think it's important to share. Adoption of telehealth. What's that looking like in the States at the moment? And is it becoming a niche service? So I guess if I look at those as two different areas, so telehealth and niche services, how are they evolving and how are you seeing them roll out in practices in the US?
Yeah, Michael, so telehealth is absolutely starting to catch on here in the US. So optometry is regulated on a state level by a state board of optometry. We have 50 states here in the US, so each state is governing their own scope of care in optometry. It's in the context of that and working with their state legislature that laws are passed allowing or disallowing the utilization of telehealth. So that said, there are many states around the union here in the US that are opening doors to telehealth. There are also other states that are blocking it. A couple of things. I think number one, validation. Safe to say, telehealth for the use cases it is being approved for, it's validated. The science is there, right? It's a lot like AI, right? It's like, hey, if it's validated, let's fly. If it's not validated, it ain't time yet. It's fine. Keep working on it. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. But for the use cases that telehealth is being positioned for, it has been validated. In that regard, we're seeing the adoption be primarily driven by corporate and private equity entities. As a matter of fact, that's where I got my first exposure to telehealth was carrying a bag in that capacity. And I was like, oh, wow, so this is what one of these setups looks like, right? But as it were, they were the first ones to really get on board with this. And some of them, have now outfitted. I know here in the local region, every location of one of the big national chains over here has one exam lane that's telehealth and then two exam lanes that's non-telehealth. Like they've outfitted all, I think they have 12 doors here in the state of Louisiana, right? So that said, it is catching on. But I tell you, Michael, I see huge opportunity for the role of telehealth in practice. And I see huge opportunity in private practice. I'll tell you how we're coming to utilize it and working with clients in Akrinos is that there are many markets here in the US. I know earlier in our conversation, we were talking about how 90% of patients reside within like a 3-mile radius of the door here in the US. But there's also rural markets that is absolutely not at all the case. Okay.
Yeah.
So what we find is that there are these areas that I was actually on a call with someone recently and they referred to them as optical deserts, deserts, right? Now I was like, it was the first time I heard that term. I was like, wow. But yeah, you're absolutely right. Because that's kind of what these things are. So what's happening here in the US is a lot of folks are moving away. I mean, for as much as folks will leave the big city and go move to rural areas, there is definitely a gravitation more to suburban areas, to more metropolitan areas. So you'll have these vast areas where you will have, what used to be care provided by the independent in any town, America, rural town that maybe would serve a broader 50-mile radius community. And there's no young up-and-coming OD that wants to move back to town. Rarely is it somebody that's not from there will be like, oh, yeah, I'll go buy your practice and move there. Okay. So what's happening then is, and this is very exciting because we've been actually getting a number of folks that we've been working with on this stuff, is think about the doctor who perhaps is in these peak years of their career with still a lot of runway ahead of them. They own a practice in this small town, and then they learn that doctor 1 or 2 towns over is ready to get out.
Right.
Have that enterprising practice owner add a second location. And you can do it in a really amazing manner if you're in a state that allows telehealth. See, this is a beautiful thing now because now you can set up telehealth. You can do this a lot of different ways, right? So you can do what I think many people think when they think telehealth is they think some remote doctor that they don't know. Mm-hmm. And that doctor doesn't know their patients and that makes them really uncomfortable. Well, you can come up with setups also where you could put a tele lane in each location, and then you can be the sole doctor taking care of patients now in two communities.
Right.
100 miles apart. You do your Monday, Wednesday, Friday here, you do your Tuesday, Thursday there, and you offset the schedule. So if you're in this physical location, you're perhaps booking, one or two patients an hour, but then you're also going to have a telehealth from your other location, perhaps one an hour, right? So there's all sorts of, and you can still be seeing them, right? So you're seeing patients in person, and then you're going into your office to do the telehealth exam for your patient that's 2 towns over. Yeah. So there's all these fascinating applications you can get into. And yes, I strongly believe the future is going more and more in that direction. And look, and this all talk is just from the doctor side. What we really need to do, we need to think about the consumers. At the end of the day, producers, doctors, suppliers, any of us out there selling anything, we don't matter. Who matters?
Yeah.
The demand. Who wants our stuff? Come across a number of studies, Gen Z, how they interact, what they're looking for, how they want to interact with healthcare. And there's some really fascinating findings there, right?
Yeah.
One, they are digital natives. So they do want that digital engagement. They do want that digital option. But lo and behold, would you know, two, this is a very skeptical generation that is coming up, Michael. It's really fascinating because, and even as a parent of teens, right, at times you're like, man, you're exposed to like everything when you're online. But interestingly enough, through that exposure to many things, they've actually become a very skeptical generation. I believe this presents a huge opportunity for private practice because you can develop the trust. You become the source of trust and connection that's lacking in the scrolls. You become that trust and that connection.
It explains probably why your TikTok platforms and your Instagram platforms, and if you're populating that with the right content and they're seeing that for that particular generation, all of a sudden you can become an authority figure, perhaps, from that point of view. And who's really making the most of that medium right now? And I see what you're saying there.
Absolutely. And then to build on that even further, let's take this into pure optical.
Yeah.
And look, optical is what? Optical is function and fashion. It's both, right? Yeah. So even take it into that realm. What is the Gen Z looking for? They don't want the stuff that everybody has. They don't. They want cool, unique, bespoke stuff. And cool, unique, bespoke now no longer has to mean luxury. So tying back to, if we're speaking in the voice from the lens of independent, understand, sure, we got these corporates that are now wanting to put the same stuff on all the shelves everywhere, but it's fascinating to consider the up and coming buyer. They don't want the same stuff that's on everybody else's face. They want something cool, unique, and different, something that tells a story, something that reflects them. Again, independence.
It goes back to the opportunity that presents for independence going forward. If they can realize that the adoption of telehealth and all that sort of stuff, obviously we can see that coming to the fore and the opportunity that presents. Niche services, again, in Australia, I'm noticing that there are more and more practices that are looking at the niche services, especially independent practices, and your take on that, whether it's dry eye, myopia management, ortho-K. Are there other areas that you see in the States that are developing, or is it very much in this line with that sort of, those niche services that are being operated by independent practices?
Yeah, it's very much in that line, Michael, right? Yeah. I mean, again, we're a global community, and as a global community of humans, these eyes age, evolve at kind of the same rate, right? I mean, look, if a youth in Australia is on the screen for 6 hours a day, the youth in the US is on the screen for 6 hours a day, that myopia progression is probably going to kind of follow suit. You know what I mean?
Yeah. It's a global
phenomenon. That said, when we do look at these niches, at these specialties, right? Certainly myopia management, huge. Anything in that vein, right? Ortho-K, get into specialty contact lens, right? Huge opportunity there. Dry eye, remember, lifestyle choices, environmental factors, and longevity continuing to increase the prevalence of dry eye. Huge unmet need out there. Additionally, I was sharing with you, these areas like oculomics, right? Where it's about biomarkers and it's about, hey, the nature of this care is far more than, sure, we will do comprehensive eye exam, get your vision 20/20, right? Best corrected. But we're also going to be talking more about your broader health, both the health of the eye and your overall health, right? Health and wellness. And I'll toss this out there as well. And I don't know if we'd call this a niche or not. Some do. And that has to do with how doctors are operating their businesses. And we are seeing an increase in prevalence of doctors who want to do a business membership plan, a practice membership plan,
right?
Get away from, if not abandon them, then at least give their patients an option to get away from your managed vision care plan, your managed vision discount plan, or whatever. And we know the same names, okay?
Yeah.
But to get away from that and transact directly with that practice. And this is another one of these areas where Akrinos, I share with you, what do? We're not about just doing stuff the way things have been done from the 90s, but doing it with different colors and bigger smiles. No, it's about changing this business model of vision and eye care. And part of that is how people want to consume and access care. So setting up these membership programs. What would be included in a membership program? You name it. And that's really it. So, here in this conversation, we made a comparison between a doctor that has a vision for, hey, I want to do a lot of medical care. I want to take care of an aging and geriatric population. Conversely, you can have a doctor that wants to do more families and primary care. Okay. So each of them, what would their membership plans look like? They probably look pretty wildly different. While there might be a little bit of overlap, they're probably going to be pretty wildly different. It's going to be based on the needs of that patient population. So the beauty of it also, Michael, is when doctors can really get into practicing that full scope on their terms in their patient's best interest, not in the best interest of some benefits manager.
Yeah.
We're going to leave that topic alone. That's a hot topic here in the US. We're going to leave that alone.
Yeah, no, it's a hot topic. Well, in some ways, it's a hot topic here because in Australia, eye care is Medicare, which is a government initiative with regards to it being subsidised. So the government pays for eye care health at a basic level.
Sure.
But the benefit that the practice gets from Medicare hasn't really grown over the last X amount of years. And that's the contentious point. Now, what more practices are doing more and more is their private billing to enable them to provide that scope and level of care. But what I am also seeing, and I've seen it with some of the big corporates in Australia, is this whole concept of a membership plan where you can pick one or two or three, category, and then that enables you to access X amount of services. Now, as far as I've seen, it hasn't been related to services, meaning product, not necessarily the actual eye care side of things or the healthcare side of things. But yeah, I think that as a model I've started to see it here, and whether that takes off will be interesting. But I definitely want to have a chat about that perhaps at a later date, knowing that it's probably quite, in depth. But I think looking at that as a concept and as a model would be really interesting. And I think a lot of people will be, interested to see how that's scoping out and how that's playing out.
Absolutely.
The last thing I want to talk about, and I know I've said that a few times now, but more and more things come to my mind, is this concept that we've spoke about prior to recording today, but the whole concept and your take on, RX trends that you're seeing, in the US with regards to walking RX trends and that general consumer shift. And I'm sure that's tied into a few of the things that we've already discussed. But if we look at it specifically with that context, how are you seeing that evolve? And are people taking RXs and going to other places? Is it something that's happening more and more? And what's your take on that?
Absolutely. Yes, Michael, very much so. As a matter of fact, now the walk-in RX rate across doors in the U.S. has exceeded 50%.
Wow. Is that across independents and corporates?
That's across any door. So it's the independents and the other, the big box, the hospital. Over 50% of these RXs are walking. That said, it's changing the dynamics of the practice economics, right? I mean, when I recall when I was coming into the industry, 2010, it was not uncommon for an optometrist here in the U.S., a doctor of optometry, where 60% of their revenue was coming from their optical. Fast forward now, 40%. I mean, you'll still have some that have big revenue, but the fact that so many RXs are walking, plus the fact that the scope of care is expanding. So now it's less comprehensive eye exam, but I'm going to sell perhaps 2 pairs of eyewear with some really great add-ons and features of the spectacles, right? It's no longer that. Now we'll do the comprehensive eye exam, but we also perhaps have a battery of diagnostics that the patient has us doing as well. Maybe that patient's also a dry eye patient. Remember, see, this is CAD. Now we're getting into cash-based stuff. So
yeah.
Or they're doing medical and they've invested in the technology. They have the OCT, they have the retina camera, they have topographers if they're doing, myopia and specialty contact lens and stuff like that. So it's where you look at kind of a total change of the revenue model. And that's where I look at the future of care from an optometrist standpoint. Lean into your services, champion your services. That is going to prevail. Patients come to you for services. What you can do on the product side, consider that lanyap. Lanyap, by the way, again, from New Orleans, that means a little something extra.
Right.
A little something extra for y'all.
What does it say that again? Sorry. Lanyap.
The term is lanyap.
Right. And it means a bit extra.
It means a bit extra. Yep.
Yeah, right. That's cool. So learned something new today. You mentioned that the revenue that's generated with the optical stores with regards to product in particular was, I think, 40 or 50% you said. And that's obviously a general number. I think for independents, and obviously I'm very much in that zone, I think it attributes for around anywhere between sort of 60 and 80% of the income of the practice. And so, that conversion component from, the refraction and the script through to the conversion of selling a pair of lenses and frames, which obviously is the main income source for most practices. It's a very hot topic, and it's a very interesting sort of KPI that there is a lot of emphasis put into it in the practice with regards to what that looks like. So if you're seeing a trend of, in the States, walking RXs and people leaving, and I know it's definitely a topic here that it's always discussed, but from what I see, it doesn't seem to be problematic. But I guess it probably speaks to the fact that, we need to be aware that as we evolve, as technology emerges, as practices, and whether it's yours or the competitor, things are going to change. And it's about always being on top of that and understanding that so that you can offer that service that the customer now demands. Because as you've mentioned, it's the market that decides ultimately, and it's about observing these trends.
And to that end, Michael, and again, I think that's definitely one of the big differences between these markets, right? So what's also contributing to optical and dispensary being a smaller, kind of a declining piece here in U.S. market is that there's other things that are providing more revenue to the business.
Gotcha.
So for example, perfect case in point, when a state expands scope of care and now Doctor of Optometry in the state can do lasers, YAG and SLT, now that's a revenue stream that opens up to that business that previously was non-existent to that business.
That's a great point.
And that's where, looking at, and I love hearing that you guys are into niche services and stuff as well, right? So think about that. Like as those niche services grow, that's a new revenue stream. So optical can impact that number a bit. But look, all this ties back to, and not that Doctor of Optometry here in the US are giving up optical business. Absolutely not. No, you still want to compete for it, right? So what do? You got to be accessible to your patients, accessible to your consumers. So what does this mean? You have got to be digitally accessible. Don't hide behind the yellow pages or hide behind, you got to be out there, show your stuff. Number 2, people want unique stuff. I just shared it with you a bit earlier. Folks aren't looking for the same thing they can find everywhere. No. They want something unique that tells a story.
Yeah.
Limit your lines, limit your assortment. Have a handful that really resonate with you and you want to dispense in your business, and then go deep with those lines. In so doing, you'll become the destination for those patients, those consumers. You will be able to, in doing more with less vendors, you'll be able to get the absolute best pricing. So you're going to help your cost of goods sold come down. And then by being deeper with less vendors also, your reps, you're going to be like one of their favorite accounts.
Yeah.
So you get that support, and that's what really throws flame on that fire for that optical.
Yeah, and I think that's the secret sauce of an independent practice. They know who they are. They're confident in what they do, and because of that, they know the market that they want to attract. And I think, they're going to be strategic in that. And then you find your community. There's a market for everyone. But as an independent practice, the point of difference that we offer over and above the corporates and perhaps the private equity is that individual aspect, which is becoming now more of a trend. And I think that suits. So understanding that and then learning how to capitalize on that is really, really beneficial. And from my point of view, I guess from what we've discussed, I know when we started chatting, my line was to go down the different stages of practice ownership and speak to some tips. And obviously we've got really caught up with the market specifically and sort of what's happening. And I've been really intrigued by that. And I really appreciate your insights on that. And obviously we're going to come back and talk about the practice and the life cycle, the practice from emerging to I guess growing and then transitioning at a later date, because I think there are a lot of insights there. But so far from what we've discussed, Erich, it's been a great conversation and so many insights and just reaffirming, I guess, what independent optometry looks like with that concept of what you see in the States. And there is such massive alignment there. So there's a lot to be learned. And I know you mentioned there's a few research papers and a few different, institutes that have research on that. So I definitely, if you can share that, in some capacity, we'll provide those in the links as well. But I really enjoyed this chat and really looking forward to our next one as well.
Absolutely. Michael, likewise, man. Thank you so much for having me on. I think it's a very exciting time to be in vision and eye care globally, no matter where you are. I mean, here in the US, there in Australia, there's so much demand, and that demand is only going to continue to rise, right? The demand for vision, medical, and specialty eye care. And I believe optometry, given scope of care, and I think that's certainly where there are differences between our markets, right?
Yeah.
It'll be exciting to see. And I will, know that you'll have me cheering for optometry from across a couple of ponds, right? Because we're a few ponds away from one another.
Just a few.
But know that you'll have a lot of support from your peers here in the US, right? It's all about serving the greater good, serving patients, and through that creates amazing business opportunities also for the entrepreneurs out there. Again, thank you so much for welcoming me on the show, and I will look forward to joining you again. And lastly, also, if any of your listeners would like to contact, feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions or, if you'd like to read a bit more on any of this stuff as well. I've written about a lot of these topics, so feel free to reach out. I can drop you guys some links to some of these articles.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, please do. Again, that's the final question. It was going to be, how can people reach out to you if they're interested? So obviously, you'll provide us some links. We'll put them in the show notes. And if people are intrigued or interested with any of the things that we've discussed and want to sort of take it further, they can find you and contact you and have some insightful conversations just as we've had. And again, looking forward to our next one.
Yeah, likewise. Thank you so much, Michael.
Thank you for joining us on The Focused View, proudly presented by Opticare. It's been our privilege to share the insights and stories that resonate deeply with the eye care community. We hope today's episode has not only inspired you, but also armed you with the practical strategies and innovative ideas to help you enhance your practice and professional journey. If you found value in our conversation, we'd be grateful if you could leave us a 5-star review on your preferred podcast platform. And share this episode with your colleagues. It helps us reach more eye care professionals like you and grow our community of visionaries. Stay connected by subscribing to The Focused View and visiting our website www.thefocusedview.com.au for additional resources and episode summaries. We look forward to your company again in our next episode. Until then, keep focused. I'm Michael Nasser. Bye for now.